The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
Hello and welcome to Compass, a new production from Pioneer Public Television. I'm Les Heen, your host for Compass. It's a weekly discussion of public policy and important issues facing our viewing area. This week, we will look at the impact of chemical dependency and local trends for aid and recovery. And later we'll talk with folks from Project Turnabout in Granite Falls about the latest in that area. And also, as we talk about these programs, we're going to have first the story of how Yellow Medicine County has created a chemical health coalition to help spread awareness, education, and prevention within their communities. Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser has more on this story.
The Yellow Medicine Chemical Health Coalition was started by a collective of people from the area invested in reducing underage drinking and tobacco use within their communities. It started with simply spreading positive awareness to youth and has grown from there. Here's what they had to say.
This coalition is focused on prevention. And so we try to make sure that our message is strong in creating new norms within the community. When we first began with this coalition, it was centered a lot around alcohol. That was the number one thing that we needed to address, but not just alcohol use with our youth in the communities, but some of the surveys and trends at the time that we're seeing were the normalcy of using alcohol in the community, as well as tobacco. Those were always ranked our two highest, alcohol and tobacco.
And our first program in our first 5 years was really a Did You Know campaign, where it was a positive spin. Did you know that 75% of our youth in our school campuses do not drink alcohol? Did you know that 90% of our youth in this school does not drink alcohol? So it was all sending positive messages, and that's how you begin this program. You don't instantly start a program like this and expect results. It's a cultural change that we tried to do within our school campuses.
The coalition has found that within their communities, it's the high school students that have the greatest support for their mission.
They wanted to get youth involvement in the coalition. So they asked me, we need youth involvement. And I'm like, well, I have access to a lot of youth. So I came back and kind of handpicked some of the kids that I knew felt strong about not drinking and smoking or doing any of that kind of stuff, and told them what the coalition was about, and they were very much on board with it.
Right now, I'm really proud to say that all of our youth groups are back up, going and strong, kind of this new life within them. Canby has the group called YAMS, Youth Against Misusing Substances. Yellow Medicine County has a youth group called PLANT, and that's Positive Leaders Against Negative Temptation. And then Echo Charter School has just now started their own youth group as well and has gotten that started and named. And then we also have a youth committee, and that committee strives to make sure that we have strong youth groups throughout each of the school districts, but making sure that we're involving youth, because without their words and their message, we don't know what we're fighting for.
So as I see a trend, I'm seeing more and more of these youth groups growing and growing in the last 10 years. And the activities are generated from these youth too, much more than us. It's kind of like our job was there to start this, and they are the ones that are initiating it and pushing the subject. So I see a trend that way as a positive result. It becomes popular now to be a part of this chemical dependency group, and that's something that we're trying to make sure that we do within all our school districts.
It's changing student cultures that Brian Scogan, as a social worker at Canby Public School, has firsthand experience with. He's worked closely with YAMS since the start and has seen the youth group grow in size and impact.
I think it gives them something to belong to, that they don't have to be a star athlete, they don't have to be the smartest kid in the class, Again, it's just about making good choices. I choose to not drink, I choose to not smoke or chew tobacco or, that type of stuff. If they want to make that choice for themselves, then they can be part of this group if they want to. You don't have to apply to be in YAMS. They just have to show up and be part of it and participate. You know, we do have them sign a pledge saying, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do this, and I will show up, I will help, and that kind of stuff. So we try to hold a bar for them, even though I'm not real good at that. But some of the kids are in the group to be part of a group. Some of the kids are in the group because they really have strong feelings about what the group's about. And I think that's where you see some cool growth and where they really take on that leadership and want to promote this and make this something cool. It's a fun group to belong to, and we do a lot of fun things, and I think that's the attraction. So if I belong to this group and these younger kids are looking up to these older kids, because these older kids are superheroes to the younger kids, you know, and you'll see that with sports, you'll see that with anything, and that's our biggest reason we do Kids Night Out, is to expose these young kids, the 4th, 5th, 6th graders, to the senior high kids, and they're like, wow, you guys are cool. And then it being a YAM thing, wow, they're that cool, and they don't drink, they don't smoke, that's just a given. You know, so these young kids think, I want to be part of that. And that's what you have to change, is the perception that everybody's doing it, because they're not. My thinking with it all is, if I can get these kids to wait till they're older to start drinking, and that's my whole purpose, is because of the dysfunctions that I see in my social work life have to do with families and drugs and alcohol. That's usually what the base of dysfunction is. And if I can get kids to wait till they're older, the chances of them being addicted to drugs or alcohol is way less. I want them to be able to enjoy a beer and be able to stop, you know, after having one or two, and life is good.
And with us now to further the chemical dependency conversation, we have representatives of Project Turnabout in Granite Falls. I'd like to say welcome to Sherry Parker, who is the Director of Residential Services there, and Mike Schicks, who's the Executive Director of Project Turnabout. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, Mike, I'd like to start with you. Quick description, I should say, of Project Turnabout.
Well, Project Turnabout is a 45-year-old nonprofit center that's been dedicated to working with helping people with alcohol and drug problems. And in that period of time, we've grown from a small facility in Granite Falls, Minnesota, which is 120 miles from the Twin Cities, to expand into residential facility in Marshall, to outpatient facilities. And frankly, we've gotten to the stage where we really are a system of care in terms of a number of different beds, 120 beds in Granite Falls, and a number of beds in Marshall as well. So yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah. So Sherry, as Director of Residential Services, and you've got responsibility for those folks who come to you year after year for treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the area that I really work with are the people that are coming for help that are on our main campus, and these would be people that their addiction has progressed far enough down the line that they really need to be in a residential setting where they stay with us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah. And I know for people who may drive through Granite Falls on Highway 212, you can see a sign that points off to where you are, but what people may not be aware of is really how large an organization this is in terms of a regional resource. So, Mike, I know during the break you'd mentioned that this is really, people don't understand this is a fairly large and significant organization in chemical dependency.
Yeah, we have grown to being really one of the largest programs in the state for chemical dependency, particularly with people from all over the state, from the rural areas of the state, to come to us. So, you know, we have 122 beds, men's and women's specific programs, detoxification programs, and so we're pretty much known as a go-to provider and a large provider. I think that the way it's going will be growing in the future.
Yeah. And hundreds of employees, of course, to go with it. You end up becoming a major employer in the area as well. When we had a little discussion here during the break, we were talking about a success, and Mike, you said something kind of interesting about sometimes we don't always see the successes in chemical dependency. We see the problems, but touch on that for me if you would.
Well, you know, the issue that I've said for a lot of years is you don't see the successes. There are no newspaper clippings or full ads or TV stories about such and such is in recovery after this, after his terrible struggle with addiction. What you do see in times in media, and what is visible, not to blame media, but what is visible is those people that are struggling. But every year we have hundreds of people descend upon us for our alumni events, and we have additional alumni events that we do around the different areas, and people are telling us, hey, we're sober, we're clean, we're happy. And that's what it's about for us.
Yeah. There's another sort of a success story here that I think was pretty interesting when we were talking during the break about how there are success stories that are based in large part about something done very close to where we are now. The Minnesota model term is thrown around a lot, and I know as Director of Residential Services, Sherry, you spoke a bit ago about the Minnesota model, and tell me what that really means.
Okay, well, the Minnesota model, really the foundation is in the 12 steps of recovery, but it brings in a professional model where people are coming in and they're bringing together the people that are struggling with addiction, and they're teaching them how to help one another with this professional guidance. And Mike, I know you were really probably a little bit more involved with some of that. If there's something else that you'd like to add to that piece.
Well, what spans that is there's, as Project Turnabout is, we have a team of medical staff around the clock. We have a team of mental health staff. We have a team of licensed alcohol drug counselors. Essentially, we surround with multiple discipline, and that was the Minnesota model, is the multidisciplinary, integrated with sort of a community self-help system.
And I know that is a model that, of course, is called that because it had its roots in Wilmer.
Right.
Largely. And then, of course, I remember even decades ago there was talk about the fact that there was a large cluster of the best-known chemical dependency programs in the country located right here. And is that still the case?
To a large extent, I think nationally and internationally, the Minnesota model is still very well known. I had the pleasure of talking to some people in the Wilmer community not too long ago and reminding them of that, and some of them had sort of forgot that along the way, but that is absolutely the case nationally and internationally.
Okay. What about trends? I mean, obviously we hear stories, all the day about chemical dependency treatment and trends. So what are some of the major trends that you're seeing in your work that other people might not be aware of? And Sherry, I'll start with you on this.
Okay. Well, again, as far as if we're talking about the actual chemical use itself and the trends that we're seeing, alcohol still continues to be the #1 drug of choice. And that's the way that's really described in the addiction field. So alcohol is still the #1 thing that we treat people for, alcoholism. But meth is making a huge comeback. I would say within the last 3 to 4 years, we have seen that number just really grow astronomically. And I know that we hear nationally about the trend of opiate use or heroin, and we have also seen that increase. But it's I always like to make sure that we bring that issue back to alcohol, because that's still the #1 issue. One of the things too, though, and you're going to find this probably all over, is the polysubstance use. And what that means is that there's very few people that now are just a pure alcoholic. It's alcohol and marijuana. It's opiates and benzodiazepines. So there's hardly anyone that is just coming in saying, I have one single problem. They come in with multiple problems.
And I expect that has also been a large part of the history as well. And I know, Mike, you've been in this field for a long time as well, that throughout the history of chemical dependency, we're often not talking about one problem, but talking about many problems for people, right?
Yeah, I think that's why the Minnesota model plays so well, is because it really involves an absolute individualized assessment that takes a look at all aspects of the person's life in terms of all the different chemical use. And there's mental health issues that are intermingled with that. There's health issues that are intermingled with that. And so we really need to start from an independent assessment that really takes a look at all these issues, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all mentality. And that's been the big trend. Once upon a time, you could argue in the 60s the treatment was like a car wash. You hooked somebody up and they went through. Okay. Today it is totally individualized, with everyone having an individualized treatment plan that melds these issues together into a life plan.
Sure. And we mentioned a moment ago that a lot of times you don't necessarily see the successes, they don't get the headlines, they don't get the attention. But if you look at the entire field and the work that you do, let's talk a little bit more about success and how you can manage or consider successes. Is it a mix of follow-up studies? How do you define success in your work? And Mike, I'll start with you.
Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to take a look at how successful our services are addressing their needs. I mean, we want to take a look at critical incidents. We want to make sure that all of the services we deliver, whether it's detoxification, we need to measure all of the services we deliver. We also need to talk about what kind of changes do people make while they're in the treatment process itself in the areas of their perception of health care and their self-esteem, and we measure that in a before and after manner. We also we have a good snapshot to take a look at what's the 6 months before your care you started here, how many times were you in the emergency room? How many times did you have domestic fights with a family member? How many times were you arrested? Now let's take a look at 6 months after that. How many times have you had those situations occur? And ultimately, yes, of course, we want to talk about how many of you are still sober and clean. Sometimes we'll see a situation where people are sober and clean for a full year at a time. Sometimes we'll see they'll have 1 or 2 relapses and get back into the recovery. So we really want to sort of take a look at the whole thing. We want to look at quality of life. We want to look at how they function. And we want to look at how our services impact them.
Sure. And if you look at another complicating factor in this, there's also the issue of incarceration. And when we have people who end up in prison, or they're getting out of prison, or when they're in prison or incarcerated in a county jail, are they getting the services they need? So what role does that play in all of this discussion?
Well, I can only speak from the role that Project Turnabout has played with people that have struggled with incarceration, and we do serve quite a few people that will come even directly from prison into Project Turnabout. They have had some treatment in prison, but really to be able to get into that really individualized aspect of it, then they're able to come onto Project Turnabout. And so we work with a lot of people that have been incarcerated, because so many times a lot of the things that happen under the influence of a drug or an alcohol.
Sure, and a transition from, let's say, a treatment program into life after treatment is one thing. When you add life in prison and outside of prison, you're talking about multiple transitions for the individual that I'm sure in many cases of them may seem insurmountable.
Well, one of the largest issues is trust. We have to help them recognize that, and this is no shot at prisons, but we have to help them recognize that we're not guards. We're counselors here, and you don't tell us what we want to hear. Tell us what's you need to do to get help. And so there's a whole cultural shift that needs to go on with that process, and also to help each other. Help each other in terms of their peer groups rather than don't be a snitch. Essentially, look, I'm concerned about how you're dealing with your approach to treatment. So you're right. There's a lot of challenges. At the same time, I don't want to leave out the fact that we do a lot of work with drug courts, and people can actually attend court video conferencing from our treatment center into the courtroom where the judge holds them accountable. And you're involved with how many drug courts?
Right now, I think overall right now, Project Turnabout is working with 9 different counties and drug courts. So we play a big role.
Another example of how all of these things sort of come together. I just realized that we haven't talked a bit about gambling addiction, which is, compared to the chemical dependency treatment, gambling addiction is a relatively new field, came in later for you at Project Turnabout and others. So we don't necessarily have the body of work, shall we say, to really look at the history of gambling addiction and the treatment of it. Mm-hmm. So what are the trends that we're seeing now in gambling addiction treatment? But I'd like to first start with saying, what is gambling addiction treatment at Project Turnabout? You're doing that right now and have been doing it for quite some time, right?
We've been doing it since 1992, and really what happened at the time when the lottery started is that there was, shortly after, there was a discussion about what happens to some of the unclaimed lottery prize funds, and it went to fund people that were out of control with gambling. And there's been a lot of research that says, just like with alcohol and drugs, there are some individuals that reach a level of compulsion that they can't stop gambling. They will gamble away their house, they will gamble away their security, everything, that they will commit crimes, they will kite checks. Sometimes sometimes you see the news, the middle-aged person that's been wonderful their whole life, never been in problems, and all of a sudden the headline says they embezzled so many thousands of dollars, or the person that leaves their kid in the car, their child in the car to go to. These are the problem gamblers, and they are mortified, and frankly, they're a more dangerously suicidal group. Wow. Project Turnabout is maybe one of 4 in the country that works with that in a designated residential program. And again, using a multidisciplinary team, but a lot of education about the gambling with the people that have it, because they think they're the only persons in the world that have it. We have a great success rate in terms of completion rates and people who follow through, and a large supported number of people in recovery from that. But they're really, really in the closet, and that's a lot of work to get them out of that closet.
So if they're in the closet and life is generally going along fairly well for them, at least from people looking on the outside, and suddenly, there's this terrible thing, obviously misperceptions that they have to deal with, that other people have to deal with. So Sherry, in your work, what are some of the misperceptions about gambling and gambling addiction that you have to struggle with every day?
Well, I think one of the misperceptions, I think, is that, especially from the gambler's perspective, is that if I just do it one more time, I'll be able to fix it. And so it's so hard to get them to realize that this is the problem, and I'm not going outside the solution. Just one more time to gamble, and even though my whole house is falling down, it's a house of cards, so to speak, that are tumbling down. If I get out there one more time, I can really fix everything. And obviously they're so far down that is definitely not going to be the case. And I think that's also what happens too, is that people don't realize that the gambling disorder affects the brain chemistry just as any chemical would. In fact, cocaine is very much correlated to the same part of the brain that is stimulated as it is for a person that's gambling.
So are we seeing then some of the same levels of success in treatment of gambling addiction that we were seeing in chemical dependency? I mean, because again, it's relatively new, it's 1992, not 24 years ago now, but it's sort of a newer field. What are we seeing in terms of the success and applying the techniques in treatment? Are we being successful?
I think we see people at Turnabout from all over the country. This is one where we, went out of the country, and we are seeing lots of success with this particular area. I think it's getting past that stigma, getting past the secret, starting to help, and we bring families in and engage the families in the healing process. Again, to people that don't know it, it looks like some sort of willful misconduct. Or how, so the anger level and the emotional level is something you got to turn down. It's easier for people to understand, believe it or not, substance abuse than it is sometimes gambling, because they don't understand, well, why are you different than anybody else?
Is that anger among the individual themselves, among their family members, other community members? I mean, is that...
It can be all. It can be all. So that sort of creates this isolation with the individuals that they don't know what to do with. They just think they're the worst person, the worst human being. They have a higher suicide attempt ideation than alcohol and drug dependency for that, because they internalize that anger into themselves. And and it's amazing to watch when one person sees another person and listens to them tell a story that's almost the same as theirs, and you can see it happen, that they begin to see, I'm not alone in the world. And that's the kind of curative effect that we're starting to see more and more with who we're working with. The problem is there's not as many self-help meetings for them to do that. So to that end, we've went to things like electronic chat rooms just for people with gamblers, stuff like that.
So the isolation is a more critical role.
It is.
It seems to be in a part, for a variety of reasons, but the isolation piece seems to be critical in that.
It is.
And then cleaning the mess up. I mean, these folks have huge debts and sometimes
a lot of legal consequences many times, and and I think, to speak back to some of that, the high rate of suicidality among gamblers, it's really hard for them to differentiate themselves from their addiction, because a person that's either drinking or taking a chemical, they're ingesting something. And a problem gambler, it's like, oh my gosh, I must be a bad person because I'm not putting something into my body. They don't have that physical sense, even though their body is reacting in the same physical way.
Yeah, sure.
The one thing I want to add to this is the reason there's not many providers is the reimbursement for that, and I'm not whining here, but the reimbursement for gamblers is not very good. And essentially, I want to give all the credit to my board, who has been there, some of them for 20 years at a time, essentially saying this is important. But this is not one of our organizational things that helps us break even. Because the crisis that brings them to treatment is they're flat broke. And so that's the issue and difficulty. It's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. We've just got a couple of minutes left, and I'm thinking about anyone who might be watching this, just thinking about, okay, I know someone who's got a problem, or I know someone who's got multiple problems, and they don't know necessarily much about treatment, they don't know much about first steps. What should they do? Where do they go? Because they may understand that Project Turnabout is there, but there are a lot of steps perhaps between what they're seeing right now and getting someone to treatment. So where do they go?
Well, one of the things, and there are a lot of steps prior to a full treatment, but one of the things is that, many treatment centers, and especially Project Turnabout, we're a resource center. So if someone wants to call in and say, I'm concerned about my family member, I don't know, this is kind of what I've seen, what do you, what kind of thoughts do you have on that? We talk to family members all the time, anyone, from myself to the intake department, to numerous counselors, to our family counselor. We're open to that, to help them try to sort things out and even suggest some of the first steps that they may want to take in helping their loved ones.
And I would never want to say that we are always full or whatever, but we're not trying to sell folks, because we really are in demand. So it's confidential, and we can help them sort through their options, and that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. So they can, again, call you at Project Turnabout, or we have a viewing area that covers a very large area. Call a local treatment center in their area, or county social service people. I mean, there are a lot of different resources, but it has to start with the first phone call, right?
Absolutely. And
being willing to pick up that phone and know that, first of all, you're not alone. There's a lot that people seem to feel like they're really alone in this. And so for them to know they're not alone and there is hope and help available.
Yeah, great message, John. So, Mike Schicks, Sherry Parker, Project Turnabout in Grand Falls, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
That's it for this week on Compass. Join us next week as we take a look at how One South Dakota Magazine is taking a new approach to journalism throughout the state.